The HP Victus 15 is a laptop that even HP had no idea would become as widely popular as it is today. Released in 2022, this was HP's way of kind of making a semi-entry-level gaming laptop, but it became so successful in terms of sheer volume sales, and of course on sheer views, even on channels like mine, that it was a cash cow for HP, and since then they're like, come on, keep releasing a new model every year, and I've been reviewing the latest model every year, which brings us to the current generation 2025 Victus 15. The configuration we have here specifically includes AMD's Ryzen 7 AI 350 processor. We've got 16GB of DDR5 memory, NVIDIA's RTX 5060 with 8GB of VRAM. We do get a modest 1TB solid state drive on board, and yes, we do also have Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.4 standards. And finally, this is a 15-inch Full HD display. Now look, the Victus 15 became popular because it managed to get that balance between decent pricing and good performance, but that's a lot harder to do in today's laptop environment. Laptops across the board are just way more expensive, and the Victus 15 has been no exception to that. But despite that, HP still tries to strike somewhat of a balance, and we're gonna see if this laptop can maintain the legend it set for itself with previous generations, or if this is yet just another kind of more expensive device than it was in the past. Let's get into it. In terms of packaging, your experience is going to be pretty straightforward. You get this black box over here, open that up, and then behind some more protective packaging, here it is, the Victus 15 in the flesh. Looks pretty similar to last year, but we'll get to that in just a minute. You also get a 200-watt charging brick here. It's crazy how these charging bricks are getting bigger and bigger every year. You do also have the wall-outlet charging cable piece, which is good from an extendability perspective, and then some basic documentation. Design-wise, this thing is pretty much a copy and paste of last year's model and the model before that year. And look, if I was HP, I'd do the same. Like I said, it's a cash cow. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, which means you get that same semi-assertive design. So HP doesn't like to make this laptop too aggressive like some other gaming laptops, so the elements are toned down. It's got a symmetrical look overall, albeit it does have a bulky form factor for a 15-inch laptop in the gaming world, but it's not too out of bounds. And then again, the whole thing does have a plastic finish from top to bottom. It's not the highest quality plastic out there, but it's not finicky or cheap either. Now with that said, the laptop does have a weight of 5.06 pounds, which is slightly above the average for your typical 15-inch gaming laptop, but at the same time, portability is never really a factor with gaming machines to begin with. And then you have some degree of fingerprint resistance here, which is nice to see. In terms of port diversity, I was a little disappointed. On one side, you have a DC charging port, a USB-A super speed port, and then a headphone jack. On the other side, you have another USB-A super speed port, a HDMI 2.1 port, a RJ45 port, and just one Type-C port with power delivery and DisplayPort functionality. In 2025, it's kind of given that you should have a minimum of 2 Type-C ports, and also it would have been nice to have an SD card reader. So again, port diversity a little bit on the lackluster side. When you unfold this laptop, your eyes almost play a trick on you for a second, and this actually feels like a much larger palm rest than it is. Maybe it's the choice of color, or perhaps it's the more swollen dimensions that usually come with a gaming laptop. Nonetheless, one real area of improvement is the trackpad. I mean, sure, you still have the same surf area as last year, and it's still a plastic surface finish, but the plastic definitely has a thicker layer this time around, which means there's considerably less flex overall, which is a good thing, and there's a lot more tactility this year, making this a pretty decent trackpad as far as gaming laptops go. The keyboard here remains more or less the same as the previous generation. So look, you've got mid-sized keycaps that aren't as large as some other keyboards because of the more compressed layout here. However, you do have nice bold font over here. It's easy to read. You have a backlit keyboard, though you don't get RGB lighting. And you also have a full-size 10 keypad, which is nice from a number country productivity point of view. Of course, the typing experience here isn't anything to write home about. I mean, yes, you get a decent amount of keystroke, but the keycaps themselves still feel a little finicky and loose in nature, which kind of just makes a subpar typing experience. It's not bad, but it definitely could be better when compared to some other gaming devices, like Lenovo's Legion series, for example. You'll also notice directly above the keyboard, HP continues to do that weird thing where they have this pseudo speaker grill. It's not actually a speaker grill, nor is it a passive cooling vent. It's just HP doing HP things. I want to give a shout out to HP for absolutely not listening to their user feedback and keeping this same broken hinge mechanism that's been plaguing this device since its initial release back in 2022. The hinge mechanism is an abomination here. It's wobbly, it's fragile, it's finicky, and it's just poorly tuned. Like, it is a bad hinge through and through. People have complained countless times how it's prone to breaking, it has issues, and then HP's like, ding, 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 money, baby, can't hear ya. Anyway, that might be a little harsh criticism, but honestly, HP, what gives? Just fix the hinge, for God's sake. Nonetheless, moving past that, I want to talk about the display fitting. So you do have a standard plastic encasing, which is pretty normal in this class range. You have a pretty abnormally large chin at the bottom, which was again present with previous generations, and as a result, you get like a 82% screen to body ratio. You do have somewhat thin bezels on the side, thankfully, providing immersive views, and then the forehead on the top isn't too shabby either and relatively thin. At the center, you do have a full HD webcam that's actually pretty decent. It does well enough across various lighting settings and has a good degree of clarity. Displays are never the signature feature on most budget gaming laptops, but I do believe that HP makes a decent attempt anyway. So you get a 15-inch IPS panel over here with a full HD resolution of 1920 by 1080p, which also means you get a 16:9 aspect ratio. Now, you do get a nice fluid refresh rate of 144 Hz, which makes gaming that much more enjoyable, of course. However, we are still stuck with the 300 nits peak brightness, which honestly leaves a lot to be desired if you are using this laptop in brighter settings. The anti-glare coating is decent, but it's not gonna, mitigate the lack of brightness here. As far as color rating is concerned, you get a 62.5% sRGB rating, which again is not anything to write home about. It's basic, and I wouldn't recommend it for video or photo editing, but it's good enough for most other multimedia viewing. In terms of technical specifications, we do have AMD's Ryzen AI 350 processor, though you can downscale to a Ryzen 5 or even get an Intel Core 5 or Core 7 processor instead. You get 16 gigabytes of DDR5 memory here. However, you can opt to get up to 32 gigabytes depending on which region you're in. And you do get NVIDIA's RTX 5060 GPU with 8 gigabytes of VRAM and a maximum operating capacity of 80 watts. However, you might also have the option to downscale that to a RTX 5050, again depending on where you are and which retailer you're buying from. I've broken down performance into two segments, so there's productivity and then gaming. As far as productivity is concerned, general stuff like surfing the web and crunching Word documents obviously is going to be a breeze for this machine. More demanding stuff like programmatic code compilation, again, you can stack layers and layers of code and you're not going to run into any major issues with the configuration we have over here. Now, as far as 3D modeling goes, for the most part, it's a pretty smooth experience. So if you are using programs like Blender, you can get away with some pretty complex environments with lots of elements without any major issues, though that 8 gigabytes of VRAM can sometimes become a bit of a limitation. And then as far as multi-layer 4K video editing is concerned, again, a very fluid experience. You can stack up multiple layers of 4K footage without any major issues, and the frame drops are usually negligible until you stack like a bunch of layers together or you're doing a lot of color grading, and render times are also quite fast. In terms of gaming performance, both the Ryzen AI 7 chip as well as NVIDIA's RTX 5060 actually have a decent amount of horsepower between the two of them, and you get 80 watts of operating wattage again with the RTX 5060 over here. The factor that often decides gaming performance ultimately though is the limited 8 gigabytes of VRAM we have over here. So for example, really well optimized AAA titles like Doom Eternal are able to run at nightmare settings with DLSS on, which is the second highest setting for reference, at an average of 161 frames per second, allowing you to truly utilize that 144 Hz display. More GPU-driven games like Cyberpunk 2077 are able to run between a mix of high and ultra settings with DLSS and FrameGen enabled at approximately 125 frames per second. If you try to push at higher settings, you'll lose the triple-digit frame rate, but again, a decent performing show. Games like Enshrouded, on the other hand, that are heavily reliant on video memory tend to struggle a lot more, only hitting an average of 68 frames per second, even with DLSS on, and that's again because they're heavily dependent on having that large memory pool, which isn't really there with just a 8 gigabyte pool overall. Now, games like City Skyline 2 that tend to play more on the CPU tend to get an average frame rate of about 56 frames per second at maximum settings. This number might seem low, but it's actually quite average because because even more powerful CPUs and GPUs often only score numbers in the high 60s. So again, this is a pretty normal number for a game like this. And then games like Counter-Strike Go 2, for example, which are less demanding, can be run at the highest settings at the native resolution at 139 frames per second, again allowing you to take advantage of that 144 Hz display. And then games like Expedition 33, which are much newer with DLSS on, are averaging around 88 FPS, which actually isn't a bad number given again that we have a entry-level GPU over here. Now of course I've made a chart for quick reference to see the average frame rates at the highest reasonable possible setting at the native resolution with DLSS enabled where applicable for your reference. With that said though, ultimately my point stands. The RTX 5060's 8GB of VRAM is going to be the ultimate factor determining how well games perform between frame rate and graphical settings over here. Thermal management has improved, but also still seems to lag behind in the temperature department. For example, under unrealistic peak loads, this laptop hits an average surface temperature of 42 degrees Celsius on the upper third area, which is about 2 degrees higher than the running average for 15-inch gaming laptops right now. Under a more realistic sustained load, that temperature drops to about 39 degrees Celsius, which is only about 1 degree Celsius higher than the running average, so not too bad. Fan noise on the other hand though is fantastic. Even under peak loads, the RPMs only produce noise levels around 50 to 53 decibels, which again is a very respectable number for a gaming laptop, so it's a bit of a trade-off. Overall though, thermals have improved. We get a 70 watt-hour battery over here, and look, it's a gaming laptop, so even with a general productivity use case, you can expect just around 5 hours of runtime, which again is perfectly acceptable with the hardware we have here. Now, of course, benchmark numbers will be higher. As far as the speaker system is concerned, it's nothing out of the ordinary. It's a bottom-firing speaker system. It hasn't really improved or gotten worse compared to previous generations. Here's a quick sound test for reference.
It's so cold outside. I'm alone, I'm alright. It's so cold outside. I'm alone, it's so cold outside.
For those of you who are interested in self-upgradability, you'll be happy to know you get 2 DDR5 SODIMM slots over here, so you can upgrade the memory down the road, and you can also upgrade the storage thanks to a second M.2 slot that's available. It's a PCIe Gen 4 slot, so again that gives you a total of M.2 slots for storage. And then the Wi-Fi module is unfortunately soldered on board, so that cannot be upgraded. The Victus 15 has a price range between $1,000 all the way up to about $1,600, depending on which model and configuration you ultimately get. However, with that said, a lot of the things are constant. For example, the built-in design quality is going to be consistent. You have a full plastic finish, the same design elements across the board, and not a whole lot has changed compared to previous generations, which I think is fine. It's a pretty modest design to begin with. With that said though, of course, if you opt to get the AMD variants, which I do recommend because the CPU performance just tends to be more efficient, you will find that they come paired with the RTX 5060 GPU. If you get the Intel variants, you may have the option to get the RTX 5050 instead. Regardless, I would strongly recommend getting the RTX 5060 variant to make sure you get that 8GB of VRAM, because that is going to be imperative to be able to play modern AAA titles at high settings with great frame rates. Otherwise, you'll probably have to compromise on one or the other if you get the cheaper RTX 5050 variant. The display is not great, but it's good enough for a laptop of this class. The only critique I really have with this device is its hinge mechanism. It is absolutely terrible, and if you are a rough user, and be honest with yourself, there is a small chance you might break this hinge mechanism in a year or two, and you don't want to get this laptop if you consider yourself to be of that nature. But for the rest of you, I think this is a pretty good value proposition, and it definitely offers decent hardware at a decent price, and it can frequently go on sale as well, so make sure you check HP's site. With that said, let me know what you think of the Victus 15. If you already have this model, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching my video. Please consider subscribing to my channel and liking this content if you enjoyed the video. It means the world to me, helps me grow. Catch you in the next one.